if you are.
All right. Call this meeting to order at 6:36.
Cool. And I'm going to share my screen. Just give me a moment here to set up my screens so I can see all your lovely faces. And hopefully you're seeing the slide deck. Good. So I believe I issued a report a few weeks ago that was the housing needs assessment, required now by state law that communities, either separate from the POCD or part of the POCD, create an affordable housing plan. And that includes kind of this concept of a needs assessment to determine affordability. What you're going to see in here tonight, what I'm going to go through is I'm going to talk about a few different things, but I'm going to kind of try and highlight how the data in that report speaks to me. And at the end of the day, this is really less about affordability than it is about housing overall. And that's because you guys are actually an affordable community and you meet the state threshold of 10% of your housing stock as affordable, 10% or more as affordable. And I'll talk more about that a little later. I want to talk a little bit starting off, which is really interesting to me, but maybe not always interesting to you. So these are kind of the topics I'm going to cover tonight. And the first thing that I was leading into there is the urban economics, and just talk a little bit about kind of how housing markets are organized and why housing values differ from place to place. And then we'll talk about your housing characteristics, then focus a bit on affordable housing, what exactly it means, the housing needs assessment that I concluded, and then I'm going to talk a bit about some other considerations that I think are important in the context of discussing housing in Enfield. And that last kind of section, these considerations, wasn't included in the needs assessment specifically. Urban metropolitan economics. Basic rules of thumb here. There's always, exceptions to the rule, and the lines in everyday life aren't as clean as the lines here on my graphs. But basically, if you take a metropolitan region, Hartford is the core, or Springfield as the core, and what you find is densities are typically higher nearest the center, and they decline with distance from the center. As you get towards the periphery, places become less dense. The same is true of income, that as income increases, land consumption and floor area consumption increase. Wealthy households consume more land and more floor area, typically than households of lesser means. So we see income increase as we move from the center, and we see density decrease as we move away from the center. You guys kind of sit out near periphery, but since you're on the I-91 corridor, you're denser than, say, a Summers, next door or so forth. And that's due to kind of your geographic location to the highway. And amenity values can always disrupt these, where you can have a place like a Litchfield, Litchfield, which is really kind of in the middle of nowhere, but has very high value because it has that quaint town center and so forth. So there's always exceptions, but general rules of thumb. The second slide is kind of to just help explain this. So land values are highest near the core and lowest near the periphery, once again, in general. If you have a much larger house out in Suffield, or Summers, it's maybe higher value than houses, say, in the core in Hartford. But at the end of the day, if you start doing price per square foot, price per acre, and so forth, we find that the highest values are near the core. A household is at a given income can access a larger house and more floor area on a larger lot further from the center. And basically housing costs adjust for location or accessibility. So this analysis down here at the bottom is just to demonstrate this. I did this about 3 years ago. This was my house in Stafford Springs. We purchased it for $136 a square foot a few years back. I did a comparable sales analysis on properties in South Windsor, a first-tier suburb, and also in West Hartford, also a first-tier suburb, or South Windsor, a second-tier suburb, Hartford, a first-tier suburb. And this is what we find. Comparable properties, $175 a square foot in South Windsor and $195 a square foot in West Hartford. Same comparable homes, but the value increases as you near the core. So the question is why? And at the end of the day, it's because metropolitan regions are labor markets. So I'm going to use this graphic here as the explanation. If my house was out here in Stafford Springs on the fringe of the regions, it was actually, this is contemplating a larger region, Hartford's smaller. So I was exactly a half hour from my house to downtown Hartford. If you think about that in commute times, average commute time in Connecticut is 24 minutes. A half hour commute is about the max that people want to go. I would have to commute pushing near to an hour to access the entire labor market by being way out here. But if I lived, say, in West Hartford or Hartford, then a half hour in any direction to the periphery, I can access the whole labor market. Therefore, that access to the labor market kind of drives value. Little graphic I put together for my students a number of years ago that just explain this in another way or think about it another way. The top of this line is space, distance from the center. The bottom of this line, we can think of this same line basically in years or decades from the 1950s. Typical house in the 1950s, let's say, 1,000 square feet, 2 or 3 bedroom, 1 bathroom, either a carport or 1-car garage. That was kind of the standard housing product that attracted people, that most consumers wanted. Skip ahead over time and we see houses get larger. Kind of the average house being built according to National Home Builders today is 4 bedrooms, 2.5 bath, 1 bathroom is en suite with a master bedroom, 2 or 3 car garage, 2,500 to 2,600 square feet. So over time and space, because development's kind of moving from the core outwards, we see the increase in housing size. We also see the increase in lot sizes, which both of these tied together result to increases in housing costs and more challenging housing affordability. I'll just use a quick example. I was a zoning official years ago in the town of East Hartford. I always think this is a good example. In East Hartford, an older 1930s and 40s industrial suburb, our smallest allowable lot was 7,500 square feet, and our largest was 20,000 square feet. I then, years later, ended up planner in East Windsor, and Laurie will know this. Our smallest lot was 20,000 square feet in East Windsor, and our largest lot was an acre plus, essentially. So you can see moving out from, say, an East Hartford out to an East Windsor, you can see kind of those changes in both space and time and the increasing lot sizes and house sizes. 8-30G is the state's affordable housing statute, and you guys aren't subject to it, so I'm not confident how much you know about it, so I'll try and explain it very basically. But one thing that the statute says is that if a community doesn't have 10% or more of their housing as qualified affordable, and we'll discuss that in a minute, then it's subject to 8-30G, and I'll explain that in a moment. The majority of Connecticut communities do not meet the 10% threshold. So yellow is 5% or less. Blue is 5 to 9.99%. And then green are the communities that have 10% or more. And it's only about 30 some odd communities out of 169 in Connecticut. And you guys are actually one of them, with 12.72% of your housing stock is qualified, total of 2,233 units. And then they break down like this: 1,340 government assisted, 227 tenant rental assisted, 659 qualified mortgages, and 7 deed restricted. The 1,340 government assisted are various government programs that assist households with housing. The 227 rental assistance, this is what's commonly known as Section 8. The 659 qualified mortgages, these are most likely CHFA or FHA first-time homebuyer mortgages, and then 7 deed restricted properties that have to remain affordable for a set amount of time. When I look at this, I think it's great that you guys are almost 13% qualified. That's awesome. But the concern I end up having is that all of these are all but the 7 deed restricted are moving targets. That is, these numbers, you could have a bunch of first-time home buyers under CHFO mortgages refinance out of those mortgages or sell and not have the same number come in. So this number can dip. Section 8s move around, that number can dip, and other government assistance moves around, that number can dip. So in any given year, you're going to see this number in percent go up and down. With being 2.7% over the 10% threshold, I don't think you're in threat of dropping below it, but I think you just have to be aware that that number fluctuates, and I guess could drop below. If anyone has questions at any point, feel free to jump in and ask. I'm fine with that. So housing characteristics. I threw a bunch of data at you guys in that report. I talked a bit about it, but I want to kind of explain to you what jumps out at me as notable or interesting when I review kind of your housing data in your town. So the first one is related to occupancy. That actually, anytime in a housing market we see vacancy rates less than 7%, that says things are good. When we see vacancy rates less than 5%, that says things are really good. So even though your values are on the affordable side, demand is fairly strong in your community. You don't have a lot of vacancy, which is a really good thing to not have. When I look at this table on housing units and structures, very quickly, 72.2% is single family detached. Not surprised by that. Add in the single family attached, in your 1 unit housing essentially totals 76.6%. That's a high number, and I'll talk more about that. I'll come back to that in a bit. Your 20 units or more, or kind of the large scale multifamily housing, is a low number at 4.4%. What you do have, though, what I've signified in this box, is what's been called missing middle housing. Most suburban communities don't have a lot of duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes. But due to the age of your boroughs, your places like Thompsonville and so forth, you have this housing stock that we don't see being built very much anymore. And that's probably where the majority of your affordability is coming from, in that missing middle housing. So in your community, it's not missing. In many communities, it is missing. So that's a good thing. But when we come over to here for household size by tenure, owner occupied versus renter occupied, The 75.5% owner occupied almost mirrors the 76.6% single family detached and attached. Your kind of high dependence on this housing stock translates into a high home ownership rate. It's the most common housing for people to own. Your renter housing, renter occupied, runs a lot lower. And as you see, compared to the county, your home ownership is high. Compared to the state, you're high. And then on the flip side, the renter occupied is low, right? At this point, none of this is good or bad or indifferent, but I could say there's kind of, other than the fact that you have this benefit of missing middle housing, you do kind of lack a multifamily housing, and it constrains kind of diversity. Next one, number of bedrooms per housing unit. And you guys aren't alone in this, but your housing stock is predominantly 3 bedrooms or more. 67.9% of your housing has 3 bedrooms or more. Once again, not surprising, with 75% of your housing owner occupied and 76% of your housing single, detached, and attached. All these numbers relate to each other. It's your, it's kind of who and what you are. That being said, it's also a housing stock that produces a large number of school-age children, at least historically, and we'll talk more about that as we move along. So next slide. Years, structures built. These numbers are a little bit concerning in the sense that most of your housing stock, nearly 80% of your housing stock, is more than 40 years old. Only 21.5 has been constructed since 1980. And just let me finish my thought, and then I see a chat question there, I think, or comment. And then only 2.7% has been built in the last 20 years, and that really only about 6.5, 7% has been built in the last 30 years. Aging housing stock, to me, ends up saying, oh, and just quick comparatively, Harford County, you can see higher percentage built over the last 40 years. So you guys are kind of running low here. And an aging housing stock always raises a level of concern for me, just due to, it means that the stock is likely smaller than modern stock. It's likely has fewer amenities, things like the ensuite bathroom or large closet space and so forth. And therefore it can struggle to compete a bit in the housing market. Another quality about it, or concern that can be raised, I'm not saying it's there, but you can also have disinvestment occurring in the older housing stock that's just not as well maintained. So things to kind of keep an eye on or pay attention to. Housing value, or housing value of owner-occupied housing, you guys are solidly a 200 to 300,000 range community. And as we see here, the census data has your median household value around 190. My guess is it's actually a little bit higher than that. But you can see the bulk of your housing stock is in this price range, 150 to 300,000. Units with mortgages, once again, kind of the middle section here with mortgages, which translates and most likely relates to these values here. Your median, though, median mortgage costs, housing with mortgages, runs lower than the county and much lower than the state. Once again, this kind of shows your affordability. It shows the older housing stock. It shows potentially a smaller housing stock comparatively. Once again, matter of fact, not good or bad, but points to your level of affordability. Selected owner costs without mortgages. You see the bulk falling in this range, for costs, monthly costs, and then the median monthly cost at $730. When we get to another graphic here, another slide, it's this one. Owner costs as a percentage of household income, and with mortgages up top, without mortgages at the bottom. The affordability definitions basically say if you're spending more than 30% of your household income on housing costs, then you're most likely burdened and housing is unaffordable. So this starts to point to maybe a bit of an affordability issue for some households. And then without mortgages, these two numbers over 30 also just raise a little concern for me. If you think about who are the households least likely to have a mortgage? And the answer to that question is seniors. So you may have 700-800 seniors in the community who are challenged or burdened by their housing costs. You don't find a lot of 30 or 40-year-olds without mortgages. So that's why I'm pointing to kind of the senior population here. Could the old Bigelow carpet mill building, multi-housing help that? Housing builds 4 to 8 units. Yeah, I would say so. And sorry, I got a bit late to this, Peter. I know I mentioned it and then I continued on. Yeah, I think we have to take a look at any of your older mill buildings as kind of opportunities here. And we will do that as we proceed. Gross rents, percentage of household income, and here we see, when you think about that, you have far fewer renters than you do homeowners. The fact that, what is this, 15, 16, I mean, you're pushing 40% of renters are cost burdened. I'm not necessarily surprised by this. But it's something I need to kind of draw attention to. Affordability challenges more often occur on the rental side than they do on the homeowner side. And it's not that surprising to see these higher percentages of cost burdened households on the renter side than on the homeowner side. This is a look at household income by households, and the census categorizes households into all households, family households, married couple families, and non-family households. And the definitions of them are over here on the left, and I described them in the housing needs assessment also. This shows you where kind of I did the top 3 percentages of income for each of these. And once again, you guys are following the normal trend. Family households usually have higher median incomes than all households. Married couple households are usually higher median income than families. And then non-family households are typically the lowest income households. Just kind of showing here the top 3 categories for each as percent of total, and then the top bracket in the bold for each, and really kind of highlighting this higher income in the family households and lower income in the non-family households. This goes back to the demographic changes I talked about. One is in the non-family households, you're going to have the 20-something-year-old who's renting an apartment or a house for the first time, and they're early in their career, so their wages are lower, and they're just not going to have the same income as an established, say, family in their 50s, right? So that's a given. But in those demographic changes, as we all also know from previous discussions, is we have more and more single person households than we previously did. And those single person households are in this non-family household category. And it makes sense. A lot of households are dual income now. Both husband and wife work, right? If you're a single person, your salary, even though you may earn a good salary, your salary still doesn't compare to a two salary household. So that's why we see this drop off in the non-family household. But it also means kind of these non-families are maybe more likely to be renters, and more likely to be challenged by housing costs and affordability. So defining affordable housing need, just quickly some of the definitions here. I'm not going to focus on all the words on these pages. They're repetitive from the report. But assisted housing defined by the statutes in 8-30G, financial assistance under any government program for low and moderate income housing, including rental assistance. Under 8-30G, set aside developments. These are developments that use the statute to essentially circumvent zoning. So if you don't meet that 10% threshold, which you guys do, if say only 5% of your housing was affordable, a developer, say I'm a developer, I can file an 8-30G application with your zoning commission, and it allows me to basically ignore your zoning regs. So if you say you can only have one house per acre, I can say I'm going to build 5 houses per acre, and you can't stop me because that's the intent of 8-30G, to get more affordable housing built. But to be exempt from those zoning provisions, that development has to provide 30% of its units as affordable, half of which have to be affordable at 80% median income, and half of which at 60% of area median income. And I'll discuss that more in a moment. There's many ways that I discuss in the report of defining affordable housing, or affordability. And therefore, in some ways, it becomes this moving target depending on which government agency. Median family income is used by CHFA, where median household income is used by HUD and other programs in 8-30G. So if we go back here just quickly, median household income 79,000, median family income 95,000. You can see that's a big difference between whether you're using family income or household income. So there can be differences here. Determining and calculating affordability. One, on the purchase side, a rough way to kind of say what a person can afford in a mortgage is about 3 times their gross income. So if you make $60,000 a year as your gross household income, multiply that times 3, and you can probably get a mortgage for about $180,000, which means you can probably afford a house of around $200,000, maybe $220,000. Percent of income is the most common and especially used on renter. Is what can you afford to spend on monthly household costs? And that is 30% of your gross income. Household costs are defined as not just the mortgage or rent, but also property taxes, insurance, and utilities. So it's not just the cost of the mortgage or the cost of the house. For a household earning $75,000 a year, 22.5 would be 30%, and that means household costs could total up to $1,875 would be at the maximum affordability limit. The challenge of affordable housing is really kind of 2 things. Either households earn too little to afford housing, or housing is too expensive for households of a certain income to afford. And in some ways, it sounds like I just said the same thing, but different ways. And as I say here, it's kind of the flip side of the same coin, but we need to pay attention to it because the nuance is important. So a household the household earns too little income to afford housing. This probably applies really well in a place like Boston, where housing is just so expensive. Boston or DC or San Francisco, New York, there's really strong markets. You can make $120,000 a year and not be able to afford a house because housing is so expensive. That's different than a household making $30,000 a year in, say, East Hartford and not being able to afford housing, whether that be rental or home ownership. So, nuance difference there, that's important. Simple solution to housing affordability: either raise incomes, increase wages, or lower the cost of housing. Sounds simple. I intentionally use that word simple because neither are easy. We can't just raise people's wages, even though we constantly debate and argue over minimum wages and livable wages and so forth. Uh, Raising incomes is easier said than done. And lowering housing costs is also easier said than done. And there's a lot of things that drive housing costs, including zoning regulations and other regulations that regulate permitting. In the permitting process, adding cost, risk, time, and so forth. Sorry. I was turning a light off that was bothering me. So the other thing I want to say is that there's limits to what all this data and definitions tell us. Just because a household spends more than 30% of their income on housing doesn't necessarily mean they can't afford housing. People make choices. So you may overbuy on a house for status. You may overbuy on the cost of a house for location or for access to a school system. So people make choices to overpay. But we also have to recognize that there's many households that just, no matter what, can't afford housing without spending 30% or more. And for those households, it's a harsh reality and a meaningful financial burden and hardship. For households of greater means, spending 30% or more of housing is most likely a choice. So Enfield Affordable Housing Needs Assessment. A few things I just want to point out here before I get into the needs assessment that relate to all this data is one, we talked about this earlier in a prior discussion around kind of existing conditions and demographics. Almost 30% of your households are single person households for owner occupied, and 40% for occupied, and 40% for your rental occupancy is single person. I also point out 2-person households here. These are those demographic shifts. If you really look at these numbers, add them up, 40 on the renter side, nearly 40, 50, 60, nearly 70% is 1 and 2-person households. On the total occupied side, we're looking also at 66% as 1 and 2-person households. The majority of the housing stock just isn't families anymore or large numbers of persons. Households living alone, 29% total, and 65 plus living alone, 12.6%. I talked about all this in the demographics, but it's this one that I want to point to now that I think is important. So from 1960 to 2016, percent of children living with only their mother increased from 8% to 23%, and only their father from 1 to 4%. It's this number that concerns me, because if you really think about it, when we oppose affordable housing, we're actually more likely to be opposing a single mom with children than any other demographic. And I think that's important to recognize. So some more data. When I look at that housing data previously, the age of your housing stock, these are the permits you've issued, total permits per year for housing. And to be honest with you, really not a lot per year from 97 on to 2017. This is what jumps out at me most. It's the multifamily 5 units or more category that basically from 97 all the way through to 2013, you built zero. Whether that's good or bad, the one thing that says to me, the majority of your multifamily 5 unit or more housing stock is older and aged. And I think we have to recognize that. I saw a chat comment come up. If I can get my screen to give that to me. And you guys have seen this graphic, and I'll get to the chat comment in just a second. You guys have seen this graphic before in a previous presentation. Just the shift that we've seen overall in new construction in Connecticut around housing. Prior to kind of 2012, only about 20% of new housing permits were issued for multifamily housing. Since 2012-ish, that number has been pushing near 50%, around 40% is for multifamily, not for single family. So let me go to the chat this time so I don't forget about it. Peter again. So housing should include an affordable and reliable daycare option. Yes, to some degree. And yeah, so I had to back up and think about what you were saying that in reference to, and that was directly related to the woman percentage of single women with children. Yeah, that healthcare option is extremely important in the context of looking at kind of total housing cost and opportunities. And I think in some ways COVID has emphasized that the challenges faced by single, mothers with children and the need for homeschooling or virtual schooling from home and the ability to meet the demands of work. If you're a white collar professional working for an insurance company, sent home, yeah, it was crazy and hectic and challenging managing your work and your child being schooled virtually, but still not as bad as if you were an essential worker having to go out to your job and now your child is not actually physically in school but needs to be someplace home, and that lack of care. That just emphasizes it, but it also emphasizes the need for kind of affordable child care overall if we've got this large percentage of the population that is challenged in those areas. Karen says there was a moratorium at one time on multifamily or affordable.
I think it was multifamily, but I can't remember for sure what it was. It might have been just condos, but
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, there was a backlash. And to be honest with you, so when I look at this since 97, and I'm sure if I had data going back further, which I just don't, or it's easily not mined out of the state databases, you would see that probably in the 1980s, you were doing multifamily condos. And then with the crash of the market in 1990, 91 or so, then that evaporated. So many communities kind of associated the crash in the housing market in the late 80s, early 90s with the condo boom that they became very timid about multifamily housing. And across the board in Connecticut, I've seen so many communities that kind of contracted their allowable uses in zoning for multifamily post 1990. And that led to this kind of era of us building such low percentages of multifamily housing that we see through the 90s. Actually, just see here. Yeah, this is the condo boom of the 80s in here. And then we see what happens coming out, this very small percentage of multifamily housing being built. So I'm not surprised if there was a past moratorium. That's what I'm getting at. Many communities had them. Sorry, just getting here. Next one. It was condominiums. Thank you, Gretchen.
Don,
Sure.
I can't find the thing to raise my hand again.
That's
It
fine.
was there at the last meeting. It doesn't seem to be here at this one. Mayfield Apartments has been building 10-unit apartment buildings since probably the late 2019, 2018, maybe they started. And they, I think right now, from what I looked at the assessor's database, it says there's 36 buildings out there with 10 occupancies. So I believe that's 10 units in each building.
Okay.
So these numbers probably don't show those units.
Okay.
At least most of them, if any.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's good to know. The reason why I stop at 2017 is the way the state posts their data. They don't have yearly totals in the same way that I'm showing here for 18, 19, 20. They're by month, and it causes me to total up 5 categories or 6 categories times 12 times multiple years. So that's why I use this. I will definitely check the monthly data just to make sure those are being captured. So I appreciate that. I see another chat question. Mayfield most likely are at or above family income for Enfield. Okay, good to know. I would assume that also just new construction is expensive, and therefore, and we're going to get to that and see some of that new housing runs at higher incomes. So this is the housing needs assessment. And basically, this first graphic here, this first chart, you'll see I highlighted owner occupied. To do this, I compared total households, owner and renter occupied households, total households to owner occupied housing units, broken up by income levels of the household and the property, the value of the property. And essentially what this shows is there's more households than there are housing units at or below $25,000 in income. And then there are fewer housing units above $75,000. So what we're seeing here is a mismatch where there are more households needing housing here. Demand is exceeding supply, creating an affordable housing issue. At the top end, it's not an affordable housing issue only because I really don't care if there's fewer housing units available than there are people at these income, because they can find and afford other housing. It really just kind of says to me, with the amount of income you have up here, you could actually have more expensive housing and be okay. But it's here that raises the concern. On the next slide, the next table comparison, I'm now comparing all households to existing rental housing stock. And when I do that comparison, we end up down here again as being an issue. We end up here again, but as I said, I really don't care about those people. They can afford housing at other locations, price points, and so forth. But then in this category, we see that this 35 to 75,000 block, which wasn't represented on the previous table, comes into play. And that's raising an affordability concern because we're below median household income here. It's the last table that balances this all out, because these first two tables in some ways are maybe a little bit unfair. Because when I'm showing you all households compared to owner occupied, some of these households are probably being picked up in the rental, on the rental side, not the owner occupied side. So when I get to the rental side, some of these households are probably being served by the owner side not the rental side, especially up here where these come in. It's now on this table where it's total households compared to total housing stock or housing units that we then see how this organizes. And that basically there's a little over 600 households at incomes below $25,000 that can't afford housing at that price point, and there's housing not available. This is basically $25,000 income is approximately the federal poverty rate. These are the most challenged, most in need households. And these households need to be served. That being said, probably not going to be able to address them adequately through zoning. It takes things like rental assistance programs to best service them. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't consider them going through this process and figure out ways that zoning can help with affordability. Any questions, comments at this point? Okay. Sorry for overwhelming you guys with data. This table here, or these tables, Hartford Metropolitan Statistical Area, the MSA, this is the metropolitan region, made up of 57 communities, one of which is Enfield. Department of Housing income limits based on HUD median incomes. So these income levels are set by HUD, established by HUD, and then State Department of Housing for their various housing programs utilize these numbers to determine whether or not people qualify for said program. We're most interested in 80% AMI and below and 60% AMI. Not to say we're disinterested in these, but from the 8-30G statutes, remember I said 15% of, or half the housing units at 60% and the other half at 80% total affordable. But I want you to look at these. So median household income based on these HUD numbers, Federal Housing and Urban Development Department. Median household income for a family of 4, and I highlight the family of 4 because that's the most common number used. But depending on the number of persons per household, these numbers shift, and they calculate all the way up to 8 households. I'm only including 1 through 4 because they're the most common. But affordable housing at 80% AMI, or a qualified income at 80% AMI for a 1-person household is $58,000. For a 2-person household, $66,75. Put that in context. If you recall back earlier slides, your median household income is around $79,000. That's 100% AMI. So 80% AMI numbers are kind of tracking near or close to what your median income is anyways, at least the 3-person, 4-person households. This is an indication of the affordability of Enfield, but this is also the indication of when we talk about qualified affordable housing in Enfield, it doesn't necessarily mean poor persons. It actually means a housing, an income level that is comparable, near comparable to the existing income levels in the town anyways. And it's really talking about workforce housing, not necessarily poor person housing, just to be blunt. Qualified rents per year. So a household earning, and we'll use the 3-person, $75,000 can afford $22,500. And that breaks down to about $1,877 a month. That's what they can afford in rental expenses. Just to put this in context, this is new construction market rents in the Hartford region. average square footage of a studio, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, and then this rents per square foot in dollar value, but here the monthly rent. Studios run around 12,600, 1,265, up to 3 bedrooms running at 2,450. Just to kind of put that in context, 3-person household, 80% AMI is falling in between the 1 and 2 bedroom there. I want to show that's not, we're not talking about low income housing. We're talking about a household that's falling within the market rents. That being said, we have to account for, because I said housing costs include not just rent, but also utilities. We have to account for some utility costs in here. And the next slide, I show that. I account for the utility costs just in this table over here. They're translated over here. So the rents, and I kind of did this poorly. If I go back to this table, so from these rents, you would have to deduct this rent for 1 person, assuming that's a studio, is gonna, at 60% AMI, could afford $900. At 80% AMI, could afford $1,250. $1,250 and $1,400 isn't very different. For the 1 bedroom, maybe a 2-person household, we see rents, affordable rents, including utilities, at these numbers, and the 80% AMI falling around those numbers. My point being, at 80% AMI, you are talking a very middle income population. At 60% AMI, you start seeing the financial challenges, the lesser income, and that number is lower than that, then you start seeing substantial challenges of being able to afford rents. Your median rent in town, based on the census, is $1,159 a month, which is approximately 70% AMI. So once again, I just want to emphasize, we're not really talking super low income. We're talking moderate income levels. This is the last section of the presentation, and it's the section that wasn't covered in the needs assessment. But I think when I was going through putting together the rest of the slides, I decided I think the rest of these topics need to be introduced and discussed. And the first of which is property value impact. There is always concerns in land use over multifamily housing is going to, I'm just looking at Gretchen's comment, sorry. Due to current market conditions, the median rent as of today may be higher than $1,159. Yeah, definitely agree with that, Gretchen. Unfortunately, just don't have good, really recent data on that because of the way the census is presented. But you're right. There's always this concern about property values, and multifamily housing, even duplex housing, anything different than single-family housing is going to harm property values. The overwhelming abundance of research shows different than that. MIT Center for Real Estate, higher density mixed income. This was looking at mixed income, affordable housing development, or developments with a portion of affordable housing. Developments in single family neighborhoods does not affect the value of surrounding homes, and fears of potential asset value loss among suburban homeowners is misplaced. Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies. Apartments pose no threat to surrounding single-family values. Very recent study, University of Utah. Apartments have not reduced single-family home values. Single-family home values located within a half mile of newly constructed apartment building experience higher overall price appreciation than homes further. Another study, increase in single-family values for those located near denser development. The list goes on and on and on. Actually, the only studies I found that don't find the same as these studies find no difference. I've yet to find a study that actually shows negative property value impact. I think that's important to address because it's always an issue that comes up in the land use application process. That these new properties, especially multifamily, is going to harm property value. We even see the same arguments that these new single family homes are going to harm property values, or these new commercial developments are going to harm property values. Other than the most noxious kind of land uses, we don't see in that being junkyards, dumps, Superfund sites, power plants, and so forth. Other than those most noxious ones, we just don't see in land use the negative value impacts. That's one. Number two is the school-age children, the cost of school-age children with new housing. South Windsor's Board of Ed every year authorizes a consultant, not myself, different firm, a consultant to study their housing and study their school enrollments and kind of what's going on. And these are ratios of the per unit enrollments coming out of new developments in recent years. Single family, 1.06 per unit. Single family, 0.86 per unit. Condominiums, ownership, my point being with condos, ownership units, 0.62 enrollments per unit, right? Apartments, 0.18. Apartments, 0.17. The fact is, every time, and this isn't just South Windsor, every time I've looked at this data, new multifamily housing construction, that's rental, is generating consistently less than 0.2 enrollments per unit. So for every 100 units, that means you get 20 students or less enrollments. Versus in single family, for every 100 units, you're probably going to get about 95 student enrollments. Apartments do not drive enrollments. Demographics drive enrollments. And I think on the next slide, no, I don't have it here. Well, let me just jump ahead to this slide quickly. Enfield's been contracting in enrollments for over a decade now and has lost nearly over 1,300 students, while you've added housing, right? So housing development's not the driver, it's demographics. This is a study I was fortunate enough to be able to do for Ellington as part of their POCD. They were having some serious concerns with school enrollments out of developments. And actually, there's some irony here. I represented a developer with a multifamily apartment development back in 2011 before the Planning and Zoning Commission in Ellington. And I had issued a report on projected school enrollments. It was the most contentious application I've ever been involved in. Multiple nights of hearings, hundreds of people showing up, yelling and screaming, and the commission that wanted to kill me. They were so unhappy with me. So then when they came out with their RFP for their POCD in 2017, I almost didn't even apply to do it, respond, because I was like, no way are they going to hire me. They just don't like me. They ended up hiring me, and even in the interview, they raised that meeting in the school-age children. And I jokingly said to them, yeah, we're going to discuss that as we go through this process. And we then did address it. And we, meaning myself and staff, were able to get from the Board of Ed actual enrollments from 80.6% of their total multifamily units. That was 2,309 units. And these are the enrollments by grade, by development, the total school-age children, total number of units, number of bedroom breakdowns, and 80% of their multifamily housing is generating 0.158, 0.16, which is almost identical to the 0.17 and 0.18 that South Windsor has been finding. Predominantly, 1 and 2 bedroom multifamily, not very much in the way of 3 and 4 bedrooms, but there is some out there. And this is the majority of what's being built in the market. Everything, or at least what's listed here for these 2 apartment developments, these are 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. Studios 1 and 2 bedroom, no 3 bedroom or more product in these developments. The numbers bump up to about 0.28, 0.3 when you start adding in 3 bedroom units. If you remember, before I go to the next slide, if you remember back when we talked about existing conditions, I implied that maybe you guys are missing out on something with this lack of multifamily, based on the fact that 50% of housing being built today is multifamily, based on the fact that I see other communities, getting development that you guys just aren't. And that's what this next slide is about. One, just to emphasize declining school enrollments. For better or worse, it just is what it is. School enrollments are declining due to demographics, regardless of housing. This is a fiscal impact that I did for a recent development in South Windsor. It was mixed use, had 125 multifamily units, and 60,000 square feet of commercial. Just look at the estimated taxes, right? 500,000 from the multifamily units, and look at the estimated school enrollment costs based on 9 new to district enrollments. Total of 20 enrollments overall, but 9 that would be new to district. And then factor in $115,000 in government services. So this is basically 200 grand in government costs and 300 grand in excess tax revenue out of the multifamily development. If we do this development overall, property tax revenue versus expenditures in government, net fiscal positive $535,000, and then one-time development fees like sewer connections and permits and so forth of $730,000. But this last slide, I think, is the most important to kind of make this point. Stay focused on the left-hand side here. So I've been involved with 3 of these, Wethersfield, Bloomfield, and East Windsor to some degree. No involvement in Tempo. I'm just stating that so you know I've had a level of involvement. I'll come back to the questions in a minute. I just want to get through this and I'll return to the chat. 275 Ridge Road in Wethersfield, 62 units, appraised at 10,600,000, assessed at 7.4. I'm using Enfield's mill rate to say, what if this development was in your town? It would pay $256,000 in taxes. Heirloom Flats in Bloomfield, 215 units, 35 million appraised, 24 or 25 assessed. Your mill rate, it would pay $852,000. Tempo at Evergreen, 192 units, 24 million, 17 assessed, and almost 600,000 in taxes. Mansions at Canyon Ridge, East Windsor, 115 units, 31 million, 21 million assessed, would pay $750,000 in taxes. Based on the enrollment numbers that I regularly see out of new multifamily rental development, the 584 units included up here would generate approximately 117 enrollments. 2.4 million in real property taxes, 300,000 in automobile personal property taxes for 2.7 million. 1.7 million in government expenditures for education and for general government services, 1 million in net fiscal positive. These multifamily developments are huge fiscal positives. And that's why, let me just return up here. Weathersfield granted a tax abatement for the first 5 years of this development to the developer. Bloomfield granted a 7-year tax abatement for heirloom flats. The fact is, municipalities are using economic development strategies, tax abatements, to actually get multifamily development because of this. Because when they're 1 and 2 bedrooms, studio 1 and 2 bedrooms, they are net fiscal positives. So let me go back to the questions here. Mayfield there, do the current there. I'm just skimming to see where I missed. Does school enrollment take into account students that go to CREC, in-town private schools and or out of town? Yeah, those are all calculated into the figures. So for example, the South Windsor studies that I was referencing show the in and outs going to CREC and going to the magnets and so forth year to year. When they go out, they're not, I mean, the fee that's paid into CREC is counted, but the enrollment's not counted in the district enrollments. They end up in the CREC enrollments. But when they return, if they're bouncing back and forth as some do, when they return, they're counted as a new to district enrollment because they're coming out of the CREC district. So. Is there data on the impact of each type of housing to the cost and need of additional infrastructure? Yes. Specifically, I mean, at the end of the day, it depends on what infrastructure we're talking about. Single family residential is the highest cost burden, whether it be on education or whether it be on, physical infrastructure, streets, sewers, water, so forth and so on, due to the dispersedness of it. Think about it. If you have 1,000-foot road with 10 100-foot lot frontages or 100-foot lot frontages, you're only going to get 10 houses on each side. That's 20 units, say, on that section of road. So the cost of all those utilities, the road, the sewer, the water, are divided amongst, say, 20 properties. Say those are 1 acre, half-acre zones, and that's 10 acres. If that 10 acres had a 100-unit apartment building on it, then those infrastructure costs are spread across 100 units rather than 20 units. That's a very simplistic way of explaining that, but I could provide more specific data as to those infrastructure costs. You also have to keep in mind that things like, as I point out, if I just go back here, as I point out, there are things like sewer connection fees. So while the WPCA, budget and administration is captured in general, government services, they're recouping a lot of their costs through their sewer connection fees and then also through their yearly user fees. So in many cases, they net wash. So those infrastructures really don't have a negative impact because they're covering the bulk of them. Or at least they're covering a fair portion of them, in some cases all, and so forth. So it's going to vary. Next question. That was Kevin, moving to Karen. How do large complexes being built affect the rental rates within the community with older multifamily units such as Thompsonville? At the end of the day, for the new construction, I would say they have no effect. And my point being is they're just at a different price point. So someone paying $1,600 a month for a 700 square foot 1-bedroom apartment is most likely not the same person renting an existing unit in Thompsonville. So both units are serving different segments of the market and therefore likely not to negatively or positively impact those units. That being said, just being honest, in more distressed communities, in a place like Hartford, where demand is so low and supply is so oversupplied with vacancy, blight, abandonment, and so forth, what you can see is that new product starts cannibalizing old product. So when a new unit comes on the market, the most savvy, capable buyer upgrades to the newest unit. What's been called the rental shift. About 5 or 6 shifts happen of people upgrading to the next best unit. And then you will ultimately have the weakest and worst unit in the marketplace fall out. And that's due to the distressed nature and lack of demand in those most challenging communities. Gretchen, it seems that women are waiting longer to have children. Families are having fewer children. Correct. Maybe even 2. I think that's a really high number. I think actually, the typical woman of childbearing age in Connecticut is probably having only about 1.57 children. And developers are making financial decisions to build more smaller units rather than 3-bedroom units and still make a profit. They seem to be targeting either young professionals or older couples looking to downsize. That's just the market. Yeah, your assessment here is correct. And it's that change in demographics, change in household size, the fewer family households, the fewer children, the more kind of flexible our lives have become. My dad stayed at the same job for 43 years. I've had, I think, 8 or 9 jobs in 27 years. That means I'm not as tethered as my father was. And that means there's more households out there that are looking to be renters rather than homeowners. Or we're not afraid to buy a house and sell it 3 years later, as I just did with my Stafford Springs house and so forth. So the market has changed. And then Peter, my thoughts exactly to Gretchen. Yes, you're right on with having the same thoughts. My point being here, and I really don't want you guys to take me as trying to sell you something. I'm really just trying to show you what the data reveals, how the housing markets have shifted, and how I really do believe that from a land use perspective, from a zoning perspective, multifamily housing development should have a future in Enfield. And when we then get to commercial development, when we start thinking about things like the redevelopment of the mall site and so forth, and I know you guys have already been talking and open to mixed use development, but I think it doesn't have to be just mixed use. It can be standalone multifamily. I'm not recommending that for the replacement of the mall, but I think the need to consider standalone multifamily and mixed use development with multifamily. I think when you look at the Mass Mutual site, multifamily may be an option there. Mixed use may be an option there. I think those have to be considered. So basic multifamily benefits, just a few things that I find. One is it creates greater diversity in your housing stock. And I'm a true believer in diversity. Look at a town like West Hartford that's wealthy, prosperous, vibrant. It has single family, affordable, and single family mansions. It has missing middle housing, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, 6 and 8 plexes, and it has large multifamily condo and rental. Probably has the most diversified housing stock in our regions, and it's a vibrant, prosperous community. So there's value to that. Number 2, workforce housing. At the end of the day, all housing is where jobs go at night. And multifamily rental housing or mixed use, multifamily rental housing is part of that workforce housing. Homegrown future home buyers. We don't move far as individuals, as a society. We don't make drastic changes unless we absolutely have to. once you attract a renter into your community, you increase the likelihood that if they become a homeowner, they will purchase in your home. So if you're looking ahead 15 years to sell your house, having a pool of potential home buyers right in the community is actually a benefit. Adds additional consumer spending to support retail and local businesses. This is why time and time again we're seeing mall sites and shopping centers come forward with this idea of adding residential to it. Enfield Square Mall owners know if they can put 200 or 300 or 500, whatever the number is, residential units right on that site, they have a captive audience for spending in their facilities. So the likelihood of getting dinner there or buying your socks there increases. So there's this symbiotic relationship. And just don't even play it out as on the same site. You have a multifamily development, then those people are going to go to Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts and spend in your community. And as I've shown here, positive fiscal taxes, fiscal position, positive tax revenue. Preliminary housing conclusions. These are some of my thoughts that jump out at me as, needing to mention to you. Your housing stock is older and aging. You need some newer housing stock regardless of what it is. Predominantly single family detached and owner occupied. You have an ample missing middle, which I've already emphasized. You have a limited older multifamily, little newly constructed. Now, that being said, I have to be honest. You have, if I go back here, where is it? I totally missed it. Oh, well. Anyways, when I was showing the permit data, it was showing houses recently built. So I'll stop messing things up by doing that. And then 12.0, that's 12.72, not 92. The housing stock is qualified affordable. That's great. I mean, you guys aren't under the threat of 8-30G. You don't necessarily have to significantly plan for affordable housing, but I think you should to some degree, and I'll talk about that as we move forward. And moderate housing affordability overall, both on your owner and renter side. I really don't believe you have an affordability issue. You have a diversity of housing stock issue. Policy considerations, allowing and encouraging multifamily apartments, either standalone or mixed use. If I were to say, and I don't want these hard and fast numbers, but generally, if I were to give you a recommendation, what types of unit mixes on multifamily you should probably be thinking about, it would be 10% studio, 40% one bedroom, 40% two bedroom, and 10% three bedroom. There is a lack of three bedroom product out there. And I'll be honest with you, developers tell me it's single dads, it's divorced dads. Looking for the three bedroom because when they have their kids on the weekend or whatever, they need the additional bedrooms. And there's a lack of product out there. And I don't think overall it's really going to generate a lot of school-age children. They're either already in your district with mom, or they're coming from a different district but not enrolling into your school. So I think there is a marketplace for a small percentage of three bedroom. I think we have to look at, from a land use perspective, these three zones, the BR, the BP, and the I-1, as potential locations for multifamily and or mixed use as a consideration. And I think overall, considering some inclusionary provisions in zoning for affordability, that if you're going to allow such units, multifamily development, that you require 10% of it to be affordable at 80% AMI, maybe a few units at 60% AMI. As I already showed, those aren't stretches of incomes. They're right in there in middle income households. And it would guarantee, it would add to those deed restricted that are stable and not changing on the affordability scale. And it would guarantee moving forward that you never drop below the 10% threshold. So I think that should be considered. On the zoning work that I'm doing right now, that feeds into my knowledge on the planning side here, is you guys have really excessive restrictions on non-conforming properties in places like Thompsonville. And I got to be honest with you, this is it's common in zoning. You're not different. I'm not picking on you. I see it elsewhere. But when you look at older places like Thompsonville, most of the housing stock probably existed before zoning did. Zoning was superimposed over what was there. And we write these very kind of neat, clean, rigid zoning regs that say X number of square foot lot, these are the setbacks, da da da. And then when it's laid over that existing housing stock, almost everything becomes non-conforming, right? And then we say, oh, you can't do anything because it's non-conforming. Well, wait a second. When you have an older housing stock, one of the things you want to make sure you do is allow people to invest in it and maintain it and keep it up. Because if they don't invest and don't maintain it, it depreciates, right? And it becomes problematic. Non-conforming status can really contribute to that. That if you say, no, you can't add the extra bathroom because it violates the setback. Well, a house with one bathroom is deficient today. A house with 1.5 or 2 bathrooms is more competitive today. Why would you tell someone, no, you can't add an additional bathroom to your house just because the zoning that was imposed upon this pre-existing structure 70 years ago isn't being complied with? I think we really need to take a close look at flexing up the non-conforming regulations in these older parts of the community and find a way to allow investment to occur that's not currently occurring. And then allow accessory apartments as of right. I just have to comment on a couple things, a few things here. If you're not aware, a piece of legislation just passed a couple weeks ago called House Bill 6107, I believe, and it is the zoning reform bill that's been getting a bunch of attention, requiring, actually mandating via the state, the allowance of accessory apartments as of right across the board. There is an opt-out provision, has to be a vote of the Planning and Zoning Commission and a vote of the council to opt out. And I believe it requires a supermajority of vote on both. I don't recommend opting out. I recommend making sure you have regulations in place to handle the accessory apartments, but they have to be as of right approvals. So I think that's something that needs to be considered on the zoning side and the policy side of the plan. So let me go back to some comments here. Gretchen, it seems like we have a pretty good mix of rental housing to serve a range of prices. Our T-ville housing definitely needs updating, but that costs money and raises the cost of the rent. It seems like a good thing to improve our older housing stock. Agreed. At the end of the day, there has to be a concern about rising rents, and the harm they could do to less prosperous households. But at the same time, investment in updating in housing is as critical and as important. So it's finding a balance there. And then Peter, it seems like we need working housing stock, money that will attract a family unit that will have 2 or more children to support the school system and the future. Yeah, there's something interesting about that. I mean, at the end of the day, at least not in the near future. And what I mean by that is probably the 10 to even 20-year horizon. You're not going to return the 6,300 enrollments. If you're at 5,000 approximately right now, chances are you're not going to return to even 5,400 enrollments. We always do this thing with kind of cost per school children, cost per pupil, that we take the total education budget divided by enrollments and say it costs us $18,000 per student, every new student. Well, think about it. Two points I want to make on this. One is, no, every new student doesn't cost you that full cost. That's because every time you get a new student, you don't hire a new teacher, nor do you hire a new superintendent, nor do your utilities per month change. There's a bunch of fixed aspects of the education budget that don't change regardless of enrollments. But think about this. If your education budget is $50 million and you have 6,000 students, right? Your cost per student is X. If your enrollments now decline to 5,000 students, your cost per student goes up by about 16.5%, even though nothing has changed, right? Hold the budget at 50,000, lose 1,000 students, 50 million, lose 1,000 students, and you have a 16% increase in cost per student. That number of cost per student is actually really meaningless. It doesn't tell us much. And I'm playing off of Peter's comments there. Actually, if you've gone from 6,300 down to 5,000 students, right? And all things staying equal, the budget holds similarly. There's actually economies of scale to have if you can increase the number of enrollments into the school system back above the lows that they are at right now. I'm not saying that has to be a strategy or should be a strategy, but I think there needs to be this recognition of the more dynamic this is than just kind of these raw numbers. Oh, they cost us X. Next one, are non-conforming restrictions something that is already in the works for updating P&Z? Yeah, I'm working on it, and we'll have kind of examples and recommendations and discussion back before the P&Z when we really start delving into changes in the regs. It's, to be honest with you, it's challenging. Figuring out a pathway through non-conformities without totally disturbing the apple cart, but at the same time creating an ability for investment, or at least removing impediments from investment, is not easy, but I can get you there, and hopefully we can get there. What is the average size of a studio apartment in Greater Hartford area? Let me go back in slides for that one. I think it's 550 square feet. Yeah, it's right here. So the average unit size we're seeing on studios is 550, 1 bedroom, 725, 2 bedrooms, 1050, 3 bedrooms, running around 1325. This is the interesting thing. On the developer side, you make more money per square foot of rent on a studio, $2.30 per square foot, than you do on a 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom. You see how those per square foot values go down? That's actually just the costs of constructing the unit going up. So there's more walls in the 3 bedroom. There's more doors. There's more fixtures. There's more all of those things. So actually, from a developer perspective, the studios and 1 bedrooms are the most profitable units to have. The fact is, they also know they can't just build those. There's not enough demand. They need to be offset with at least 2s, if not some 3s.
Don?
Yes.
Don, Richard Suzak has his hand up.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I don't see the hands. My apologies. Yes, Richard.
Yeah, again, I was just going to emphasize that we have recognized that the non-conforming restrictions are not valid in a lot of locations, and that is one of our pet peeves in planning and zoning, that they just blatantly threw out I guess designations for certain zones that didn't have anything to do with that zone, and just to sort of define a zone as being either R33, R22, or whatever. And that is one of our priorities in what we're going to be doing in revamping our regulations, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And once again, when I bring those things up, I'm never casting blame. It is just what it is, and I see it in every community. There was a development, Lori, I can't remember the name of it, but older kind of World War II era housing off of Route 5 in the north end of town in East Windsor. It was built in a different era. Zoning was applied to it later, and like you can't sneeze in a house without needing a variance in that development in East Windsor. And when you look back through the variance files, you just see that, you know, like every property on this in this development has a variance, because if you want to put it add a garage, or if you want to add a front stoop or a back porch, you run up against zoning. So it just is what it is, but there are ways to make it work.
So Don, I just wanted to comment, we also have obviously a number of subdivisions that we have non-conforming regulations for, that have to come in for a special permit to put in a garage. So, you know, those are the areas that we should, you know, down
Yeah.
zone and put back to what the zoning was when it was developed.
Yeah.
The other thing that I want to comment on is that when we go for any grants at this point, there is a section with just about every grant that requires us to show how we are continuing to promote affordable housing, whether or not we are exempt or not. So
Good point.
that is a big deal that we have to show that. So
Yeah, and that's just, and I lost sight of that, kind of threading the needle between analyzing the housing stock and the affordability in the context of a POCD. But when I've strictly been doing affordable housing plans, one of the key points I've been making up front is the fact that, you know, there's been a shift from Governor Lamont and from the state legislature, that over the past few years, affordable housing has been elevated to a top priority of the state. And therefore, you're seeing that, you know, not only come through in legislation related to affordable housing or related to zoning, but you're also seeing it in state agency requirements for things like municipal funding and grants and so forth. So it's an elevated status of policy that really can't be escaped right now. And I don't see the tide shifting or the pendulum swinging back anytime soon. So. Yeah, the Gretchen's last comment there, you know, making money. I just rephrase it kind of in a different way. At the end of the day, regulations and stability in regulations provide predictability and confidence in the real estate development market, regardless of profits or whatever. The fact is, if things are constantly changing, that undermines risk. And while there are benefits to changes in legislation that are going on, and there are benefits to us updating the zoning regulations, the fact is you don't want to be flip-flopping year to year on things, because that can undermine predictability and confidence in the marketplace. All right. I'm done if you guys are done, and hopefully I haven't bored you to
I have
death.
a question. In terms of, I was recently involved in some multifamily housing developments, and one of the concerns that was raised was that, you know, especially in the lower income, you know, levels, where you have, you know, multi-families moving into one unit because of the fact that, you know, they don't have enough funds to afford a unit, so that you get more people into a unit than can actually, you know, the unit can house. And that, you know, that's always a concern when you start, you know, and again, I think that it reflects some of your concerns about, you know, the lower income people not being able to afford something. So they start sort of congregating as units rather than individual families. And, you know, and it does lead to some potential for misuse of housing and you know, creating, you know, environments where, you know, there's roaming people that aren't necessarily, you know, guided in the correct direction. And how do we address something like that in terms of?
Yeah, so a couple things. One is that's what drove that was actually the underlying thing that drove the study I did on this in Ellington. They had a specific apartment development that was generating much higher ratios of school-age children than anyone would have anticipated based on the unit mix. And a couple things were going on. That kind of doubling up of households was occurring in there, but it was also because there was a bunch of apartment units that, when approved, had dens, and oddly enough, some of them had 2 and 3 dens that were actually functioning as illegal bedrooms. That's what drove us to this point. But part of that is the multi-generational households that we see in emerging immigrant populations is one. The doubling up of young couple households, not happening as much here in Connecticut as I'm seeing elsewhere in the country, but it's still an occurrence. These are my general feelings, or generally what I've seen out there and know is it's happening the least in new construction. It's most common in older multifamily housing stock. And once again, the dynamics come back to income and affordability. The new construction is the Class A, top value, top rents that are the least accessible by lower income households. That $2,400 a month for a 3-bedroom new construction, that is, you're talking a $90,000 median household income to actually afford that. So we're not seeing it in the new construction. It's occurring more in the older stuff. Actually seeing it occur most in the condominium rental stock. So many people, if you just think now, the condos are 40 plus years old. So many people have kept them when they moved on and purchased things and turned them into rentals. So we're seeing higher percentages of rentals in condominiums than previously seen. They were built in an era where a lot of them are 3-bedroom and can accommodate kind of larger head counts, whether it's children or adults, into them. So it's the older kind of condo stock that I've been seeing that occur in more. That's been some of the concerns or some of the driving. South Windsor is actually experiencing increased enrollments. They're one of the few communities experiencing enrollment increases. They keep on thinking it's their new multifamily development. It's not. It's the natural turnover in their existing housing stock, and it's actually they have a large number of those 1980s condominium complexes that are 3 bedrooms and are now rentals. So we're seeing it in certain places in the marketplace. If it's a really true concern, specific lease restrictions can be considered and negotiated with the developer as part of, conditions of approval and stuff on, capping out kind of how units are occupied and so forth. So
Can I make a comment? It's Gretchen.
Sure.
So that gets kind of tricky with fair housing laws, because you can't really dictate how many people necessarily live in the number of bedrooms that you have.
Yep.
The landlord could be brought to fair housing court over that and would probably lose. So that's very, very sensitive area.
Yeah. But in zoning, you guys do have the ability to define family, which is a challenging area of zoning with, federal Supreme Court decisions and so forth on it. But there are things you can do. But yes, you have to be aware of fair housing and not run afoul of it. The other thing is just be cautious in other things. Like, I can guarantee you, let's say your mall owner comes in tomorrow with a multifamily development application. I guarantee you those 1-bedroom and even 2-bedroom units are going to include dens because of where we are right now in this world. The fact is, we want extra space. It's either going to be a den or it's going to be a home office and so forth. But doing simple things like the den is built with a half wall or an oversized entrance that you can't just throw any standard bought door on. Doing simple things through design to ensure that they don't get utilized as bedrooms can go a long way to kind of fending off problems in the future. The experience in Ellington I had, when we went through and looked at the floor plans of these units, it was just so evident that these were planned as intentional bedrooms that somehow no one ever caught through the approval process 30 years ago. That was evident, but moving forward, many developments I've been involved in on both sides, for municipalities and for developers. My comments have been constant on just looking at how those dens are designed to make sure that they truly aren't bedrooms, as that case in Ellington. So. Anything else? All right, you guys are awesome. I thank you for taking the time this evening to meet. And I know I'm going to see a bunch of you, at least those planning and zoning members, next week at PZC to discuss zoning. Any final business for you, Lori, or just a wave goodbye?
No, I think we'll just make a motion to adjourn.
Great.
Very informative. Very informative. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
Thank you.
Good night.
Yeah, and if people want to listen to this zoning discussion, tune in next week. PCC. All right, thank you, Don.
Thanks. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time and attention, and see you soon.
All right.
Okay, take care all.
Take care.
Have a good night.
All right, thanks.